there's something broken at the moment about how people pair up in the Western world.
Yeah.
And it's at the source of why we're not having enough children, because there's not enough couples, there's not enough marriage, there's not enough of all these traditional values that even 50, 60, 70 years ago was just taken for granted. We're in this grand experiment of what happens if we just remove a bunch of institutions. What happens if we no longer value marriage as something to aspire to? What happened if parenthood is now seen in some camps as almost something like weird or against your own self-expression? It's a grand experiment that I'm kind of curious how it turns out. I'd prefer to watch it as a movie, like The Children of Men, of like, that was a good show. I kind of wish that wasn't reality, but we're seeing that reality play out while I'm sitting here in a very traditional two-parent loving household with 3 children and going, this is now at the top. I've done a lot of things in my life. I've built software, I've built companies, I've raced cars, I've done all sorts of things. And I would trade all of it in a heartbeat for my kids. That's just a really fascinating human experience. That the depth of that bond is something you can't appreciate before you have it. But I also think there is a role to play to talk it up, because we're being bombarded constantly with reasons why not to. Oh, it's too expensive. Well, you could get divorced and then you might lose half. There's all these voices constantly articulating the case against marriage, the case against having children. That those of us who've chosen to do the traditional thing, to get married and to have children, have an obligation to kind of talk it up a little bit, which would have seemed ridiculous, again, 50 years ago, that you'd have to talk up something so fundamental as that. But I have become kind of obligated in that sense to do just that, to talk it up, to say, do you know what? You can look at everything that I've done, and if you like some of those parts, realize that to me, in this situation, the kids, the family, the wife is more important than all of it. And it sounds like a cliche because you've heard it 1,000 times before. And by becoming a cliche, maybe you start believing it's not true, that it's just something people say. But it is reality. I know almost no parents that I have personal relationships with that don't consider their children to be the most important thing in their life.
So there's a lot of interesting things you said. So one, it does seem to be, I know a lot of parents, perhaps more interestingly, I know a lot of super successful people who are parents who really love their kids and who say that the kids even help them to be more successful. Now, the interesting thing, speaking to what you're saying, is it does seem for us humans, it's easier to articulate the negatives because they're sort of concrete, pragmatic. It costs more, it takes up time. They can be crying all over the place. They're tiny narcissists running around or whatever.
Which is all true. But
yeah, pooping everywhere, that kind of stuff. But to articulate the thing you were speaking to of there's this little creature that you love more than anything you ever loved in your life, it's hard to convert that into words. You have to really experience it. But I believe it, and I want to experience that, but I believe it because just from a scientific method, have seen a lot of people who are not very capable of love fall completely in love with their kids.
yes.
Like, very sort of, let's just call it what it is. Engineers that are very like beep,
Yes.
boop, bop.
Yes.
They just fall in love. And it's like, all right, people who, just like you said, they don't really care or don't really think about having kids, that kind of stuff. Once they do, it changes everything. So, but it's hard to convert into words.
One of the reasons that I think it's also difficult is, I like kids. Not that I actively dislike them. But when I was around other people's kids, I didn't have an emotional reaction. Some women have, right? They see a baby and they go, "Oh!" I never had any emotion of that. I could appreciate. I'm glad for you that you have children. It did not provoke anything in me. the emotions that are provoked in me when I look at my own children. This doesn't exist in the same universe. So you don't have a complete parallel, or at least a lot of men, or at least me, I didn't have sort of a framework to put it into. What would it be like to have my own child? And then you experience it, it's like and it happens so quickly too. This is what I found fascinating. It happens before that little human is even able to return any words to you. That the love you develop to an infant happens quite quickly. Not necessarily immediately. I don't know. Different people have different experiences. But it took me a little bit. But then once it just hit like kick of a horse. And I love that it's also just such a universal experience. That you can be the most successful person in the world. You can be the poorest person in the world. You can be somewhere in the middle. And we share this experience that being a parent, for most of them, turns out to be the most important thing in their life.
But, it is really nice to do that kind of experience with the right partner. But I think because I'm such an empath, the cost of having the wrong partner is high for me. But then I also realized, man, I have a friend of mine who's divorced happily, and he still loves the shit out of his kids, and it's still beautiful. It's a mess, but there's all of that love is still there, and it's you just have to make it work. It's just that I don't know, that kind of divorce would destroy me.
You should listen to The School of Life. He has this great bit on YouTube. You will marry the wrong person. If you accept upfront that you will marry the wrong person, that every potential person you can marry is going to be the wrong person on some dimension. They're going to annoy you. They're going to be not what you hoped in certain dimensions. The romantic ideal that everything is just perfect all the time is not very conducive to the reality of hitching up and making babies. Because I think, as you just accounted, even when it turns to shit, I find that most of the people I personally know where things have fallen apart and have turned to shit, never in a million years would they go I regret it. I would rather my children did not exist because a relationship turned sour. I mean, I think you should try very hard. And I think this is also one of those things where we didn't fully understand those fences. And when we pulled them up and celebrated how easy it is to get divorced, for example, that wasn't going to have some negative consequences. I'm not saying you shouldn't have divorces. I'm not saying return to times past. I'm saying, though, that civilization over thousands of years developed certain technologies for ensuring the continuation of its own institutions and its own life that perhaps we didn't fully appreciate. I mean, again, this is something Jordan Peterson and others are far more articulate to speak about, and that I've learned a lot to just analyze my own situation. Why is it that this incredible burden it is to be responsible for someone else's life that you brought into this world is also the most rewarding part of existence? That's just curious. Before I heard Peterson articulate the value of taking on the greatest burden you know how to carry, I always thought about burdens as a negative things. Why would I want the burden of a child? I might screw it up. I might be a bad parent. They might have bad all this stuff, right? All the reasons why you shouldn't, and so few voices articulating why you should.
Yeah, but I should also add on top of that thing you mentioned, currently, perhaps in the West, the matchmaking process
Is broken.
It's broken, and technology made it worse.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. This whole thing that hasn't been solved. So hiring great teams, that's probably been solved the best out of matchmaking. Finding great people to hire.
Right.
Second, finding great friends. That's also hasn't been solved.
And it's breaking down.
It's breaking down. And third is matchmaking for relationships. That's the worst. And in fact, technology made it even worse.
Yes.
It's fascinating.
It is. It's a great example, again, of how all the greatest intentions still led us straight to hell. I really enjoy Louis Perry's analysis of the sexual revolution not being an unqualified good, which was something I hadn't thought about at all before she articulated it, that Of course, women should be able to have freedom and self-determination and abortions and all of these things. And Louise Perry is not arguing against that either, of course. But there are second-order effects that we don't appreciate at the time, and we may not have ready-made solutions for. That's just interesting. You make life better in a million different ways, and somehow we end up more miserable. Why is that? Why is it that humans find meaning in hardship? And I think some of that is that it's a difficult question to answer through science. And again, Peterson articulates well this idea that you have to find some of it through art, some of it through authors, some of it through different. I was just about to say modes of knowing before I stopped myself because that sounds like woo bullshit. But there are different ways to acquire those deep lessons that sort of paper is not going to tell you.
I mean, this is really the point. Also applies to religion, for example. If you remove from society the software of religion,
Yes.
you better have a good replacement.
And we've had a bunch of bad replacements, especially over the last few decades. Religion is one of those things I've struggled with a lot because I'm not religious, but I sort of wish I was. I can now fully appreciate the enormous value having an operating system like that brings, not just at the individual level, but rather at a societal level. And it's not clear at all what the answer is. I think we've tried a lot of dead ends when it came to replacements, and people have been filling that void in a million different ways that seem worse than all the religions, despite their faults in a myriad of ways, have been able to deliver.
Yeah, religion is like the Cobalt Code. It's just
Yes. It's the institutions where we don't fully understand the rules and why they're there and what's going to happen if we remove them.
Yeah.
Some of them, seems obvious to me, are just bullshit of the time. Oh, you shouldn't eat whatever, shellfish, because in that region of the world, there was something, something, something. Okay, fine. But there's a bunch of other things that are pivotal to keeping society functioning for the long term, and we don't fully understand which is which. What's the bullshit and what's the load-bearing pillars of society?